The morning sun gilded the skyline of Ouagadougou as President Ibrahim Traoré stepped from the stately halls of the presidential palace. Unlike other mornings brimming with diplomatic briefings, press photo ops, and scripted handshakes, this Monday carried a different charge: raw curiosity and quiet defiance. Dressed simply in a plain brown shirt, no suit or tie, Traoré slid into the back seat of the blacked-out SUV. His voice was calm, yet unmistakable. "Drive me to the central prison," he told his driver, leaning forward to peer through the tinted glass. "No notice, no press, just us." The driver's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, uncertainty showing. "Sir, shouldn't we inform the warden? Alert security? Prepare a guard detail?" "No," Traoré replied firmly, his gaze steady. "I want to see how our people live there. No stage tours. I want the real conditions." The SUV slipped out under a single unmarked escort car, weaving through the capital's bustling streets. Market vendors hawked bananas and peanuts. Children chased one another through dust-caked courtyards, their laughter echoing against sun-baked walls. Traffic crawled, taxis honked. Yet no one could have guessed the nation's leader was on a mission to expose the cracks in his country's justice system. 40 minutes later, the convoy came to a halt before the gray monolith of the Ouagadougou Central Correctional Facility. Razor wires snarled atop concrete battlements. Guards in olive fatigue stood at rigid attention, surprise flickering across their faces as they recognized the presidential insignia gliding through the gates. "Mr. President," a guard stammered, fumbling with his keys. Sweat beaded on his brow despite the early hour. Traoré opened the door. "Exactly why I'm here," he said. "Open the gates." Inside, the warden, Pascal Ouedraogo, rushed forward, hat in hand. He offered a hasty bow. "Your Excellency." With more notice, no preparations, Traoré interrupted, stepping past him. The air grew colder in the stone corridor. "Take me to the prisoners." Footsteps echoed as they entered the main block, a narrow hallway ringed by steel doors and barred windows. The stench hit immediately. Damp bodies unwashed for days, clinging to threadbare uniforms, despair hanging heavy in the stale air. Muffled coughs and distant shouts punctuated the silence in the common area. Inmates who had been playing cards or lying on thin mattresses rose at the president's approach. Some faces twisted in disbelief. Others registered a spark of hope they hadn't felt in years. Traoré moved among them with deliberate calm. He reached out a hand to a young man whose face bore the bruise of recent solitary confinement. "How long have you been here?" he asked, voice quiet. 2 years, sir," the man replied, voice cracking. "Assault charge." "Family?" Traoré inquired gently. "My mother. She visits when she can afford the bus fare." Traoré nodded, absorbing every detail. The cost of freedom weighed not in dollars, but in lost time, strained relationships, broken dreams. He knelt beside a table, examining a stack of letters from prisoners' loved ones. Every envelope was a lifeline folded in paper. For more than an hour, he shook hands, asked names, and listened. Some spoke boldly of unfair trials, others wept quietly at the attention from their own head of state. Guards glanced nervously as remote cameras rolled. No public relations team, no smiling photo op, only raw, unfiltered human connection. At the far end of the block, Traoré paused before a small, dimly lit cell. There, a solitary figure sat on the concrete floor, head bowed, shoulders slumped in utter resignation. Unlike the others, he did not rise or thrust his hand forward. He seemed to have surrendered to life behind bars. Traoré crouched at the bars. "Your name?" "Emmanuel," the man whispered, voice barely audible. "And how long have you been?" "Here, Emmanuel." "7 years, sir." "7 years." The word hung in the stale air like an anchor. Traoré studied Emmanuel's gaunt face, the hollow cheeks, the weary eyes that had seen too much. He placed his hand gently on the man's shoulder. "You're not forgotten," Traoré said softly. "Your voice matters." In that moment, the imprisoned man's eyes flickered with something new. Recognition that even behind cold walls, their president stood as their advocate and ally. President Traoré noted the absence of fury or bitterness in Emmanuel's posture. Instead, he saw a quiet dignity, a man who had endured profound injustice without losing his humanity. "What were you charged with?" Traoré asked softly. Emmanuel's throat tightened, but his voice emerged stronger than before. They accused me of embezzling funds from my employer, sir, but I never stole a farthing. I worked for Monsieur Laurent Gueux over 8 years, filing invoices and balancing ledgers. When his nephew needed a job, they needed someone to pin the blame on, so it was me. As Emmanuel spoke, his tone shifted from whispered defeat to determined clarity. Each word resonated in the cell's hushed air, as though speaking to someone who truly wanted to listen had reignited a spark that had smoldered out long ago. Traoré absorbed every detail: the long years of loyal service, the sudden betrayal, and the hollow courtroom where rumors sufficed as evidence. He glanced toward the warden, standing stiffly behind him. I want Emmanuel's full case file. Every sheet of paper, every line of testimony, every record of his hearing, he directed. And find the names of the judge and arresting officers. The warden swallowed, stammering that gathering those documents would take time. Traoré's voice dropped to a steely whisper. You have until sundown. With that, he turned back to Emmanuel, whose eyes reflected equal parts relief and skepticism. Did you appeal? The president pressed. Emmanuel exhaled a bitter laugh. With what resources, sir? My wife left within the first year, couldn't bear the shame. She took our children back to her family's village. No money for appeals. No attorneys willing to fight a battle they thought was already lost. No voice that carried any weight. Traoré felt a cold anger coil in his chest, a rage at a system that had allowed this man's life to be stolen. For 7 long years, Emmanuel had been forgotten, abandoned by both family and justice. And visitors? Traoré asked softly. Emmanuel's gaze fell. No one, sir. I sent letters for 2 years, hoping someone would respond. But the silence was louder than the locks. That evening, in the solitude of his Justice Ministry office, Traoré spread Emmanuel's file across his desk. The pile of documents revealed a rush trial, with circumstantial evidence strung together by a corrupt judge who had been dismissed 3 years earlier for taking bribes. The presiding magistrate, Amadou Diabra, had condemned Emmanuel to 15 years in mere minutes, then quietly moved on to a lucrative corporate appointment. Traoré's fingers trembled as he read flawed witness statements, ignored alibis, and the employer's manipulated ledgers. Within the hour, the Justice Minister, Ibrahim Traoré, arrived at the presidential office, summoned by an urgent message. Traoré, pacing like a trapped animal, didn't pause. He thrust the file across the desk. Read this, he said, voice low with controlled fury. Tell me how our justice system could fail so catastrophically. How one man's life was erased on flimsy pretext. Ibrahim's eyes widened as he leafed through the pages. His face drained of color as each revelation sank in. The judge's past misconduct, the unexamined plea deals, the absence of legal representation. This is appalling, he whispered. We must act immediately. Traoré nodded. Tomorrow at dawn, I want a full review board assembled. Judges, legal scholars, human rights advocates. Emmanuel's case will be reopened, and every prisoner who endured a similar miscarriage of justice will get the same chance. In that moment, President Traoré transformed private outrage into national resolve. What began as a solitary walk through a prison block had become the ignition point for sweeping judicial reform, proving that true leadership is measured not by power preserved, but by injustice confronted and turned toward redemption. But sir, the conviction stands, the minister protested, voice tight with unease. We cannot seek justice? Traoré cut in, his tone icy. Cannot correct our mistakes? Cannot admit we have imprisoned an innocent man for 7 years? The room fell silent. The minister's protests died on his lips in the face of the president's resolve. Here's our plan, Traoré continued. Tomorrow at first light, convene an independent review panel. I want veteran prosecutors, seasoned defense attorneys, and respected human rights observers. They will re-examine every piece of evidence, from the initial arrest through the final verdict. And I want Laurent Gueux investigated. If he framed Emmanuel, he likely did it before and after. Over the next 48 hours, the review team worked without pause. They uncovered a shocking pattern. In the last decade, Gueux's logistics firm had leveled identical theft charges against 5 other employees. Each accused was poor, unrepresented, swiftly convicted. In every case, the trial lasted less than 2 hours, the outcome predetermined. More disturbing was their finding on Emmanuel's file. Handwriting experts confirmed that his confession had been forged. Financial records, purportedly showing misappropriated funds, or digital traces of manipulation. Testimony from a single, ill-prepared witness formed the trial's backbone. When the panel delivered its report, Traoré felt vindication and fury in equal measure. Emmanuel had indeed been set up, his life stolen for someone else's gain, buried under a corrupt system's indifference. We will do more than free him, the president declared to the assembled ministers. We will overhaul the system that allowed this travesty. No more hidden injustices. The next morning, Traoré returned to Ouagadougou Central, but not alone. A legal team and a phalanx of media cameras trailed him through the iron gates. Word had spread through the prison. The president was coming back, and this time, he brought the promise of redemption. Inside the hushed corridors, Emmanuel sat on his bunk, head lowered. 7 years of disappointment had taught him not to hope. His world had shrunk to the four walls and the faint echo of guards' footsteps. Then came the click of boots on concrete. Traoré's calm voice pierced the silence. Emmanuel. The prisoner looked up, disbelief etched across his gaunt face. He saw not only the president, but justice ministers, reporters, lawyers, an entire nation watching. His heart pounded so fiercely he thought it might burst. Traoré stepped close, placing a hand on the cell's bars. I have read every page of your file. You were wrongly accused and abandoned by those who should have protected you. I'm sorry. Each word registered like a lifeline. Reporters' microphones hovered inches away, recording every syllable. Down the block, inmates pressed against their bars, tears glistening in their eyes. Traoré turned to the legal team. Emmanuel, you are free to go. Silence reigned for a heartbeat. Then Emmanuel's knees buckled as the cell door swung open. He rose, legs trembling, tears streaming unashamed down his cheeks. Outside, the prison erupted in cheers. Men who had spent years in darkness embraced one another as though born anew. Their shouts bounced off concrete walls in a thunderous song of hope. Beyond the gates, a crowd had gathered. Family members, journalists, ordinary citizens drawn by the promise of justice. As Emmanuel stepped into the bright morning sun, he squinted against the glare, overwhelmed by the noise, the flashes of cameras, the shouting voices. Reporters clamored. How does it feel? What will you do now? Do you hold anger toward those who wronged you? Emmanuel stood quietly, his gaze meeting Traoré's. In that shared moment, a former prisoner and the president who refused to look away, something profound passed between them. The rebirth of dignity, the beginning of real reform, and the knowledge that one man's release could signal freedom for many. The roar of celebration still echoing off the prison walls. Emmanuel stood blinking in the bright sunlight, his mind racing faster than his heart. When at last he found his voice above the applause, it came soft and unsteady. I don't know how to feel, he admitted honestly. I have no family, no home, no job, only 7 years of my life gone. But today I have hope, and perhaps that's enough to start with. President Traoré stepped forward and placed a steady hand on Emmanuel's shoulder. You are not alone, he declared, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. Our nation owes you a debt we can never fully repay, but we will do everything in our power to help you rebuild your life. True to his word, Traoré personally escorted Emmanuel to the presidential guest house, where a hot shower, clean clothes, and a proper meal at a real table felt nothing short of miraculous. That evening, in the guest house's quiet sitting room, Traoré and Emmanuel sat opposite each other over steaming cups of tea. The formal distance between head of state and former inmate had melted away, leaving two men bound by a shared purpose. Tell me about your dreams, Traoré asked. Before all this, what did you want from life? For the first time in years, Emmanuel smiled, genuine, unguarded. I wanted to be a teacher, he said. I studied education before I took the job with you. I love the idea of helping children learn, of giving them tools to build better lives. Then that's what you'll do, the president replied decisively. We'll arrange for you to complete your education, and when you're ready, you'll have a position in our schools. But Traoré's vision extended even farther. Over the next days, while Emmanuel began catching up on missed meals and feeling the pinch of real beds, the president drafted plans for an unprecedented national audit of the entire prison system. At a tense cabinet meeting, ministers fretted over the possible fallout of reopening convictions. Traoré silenced them with a simple truth. What if we find hundreds more innocent people behind bars? Then we fix every single case. Justice delayed is justice denied, and we have denied it for too long. Within a week, Traoré unveiled Operation Justice Light, a sweeping review of all inmates serving more than 5 years without legal representation. Emmanuel would not only benefit, he would become the movement's ambassador, a symbol of courage and redemption. 3 months later, Emmanuel stood before a packed auditorium at the University of Ouagadougou. Dressed in a crisp white shirt and dark jacket, he bore little resemblance to the hollow-eyed man walked free. "I speak today not as a victim," he began, voice clear and strong, "but as a witness to what happens when power acts without accountability and as proof of what's possible when leaders choose courage over convenience." In the front row, President Traoré listened with pride as Emmanuel addressed future lawyers, sharing first-hand lessons on empathy, fairness, and the oath to protect the innocent. Elsewhere, Operation Justice Light had already examined over 2,000 cases in just 6 months, identifying 347 wrongful convictions and exposing a network of corrupt businessmen who used false allegations to destroy livelihoods. Judges had been bribed, evidence fabricated, and witnesses intimidated. Even Laurent Gbagbo himself now faced investigation and charges. As the nation watched this ripple of reform spread from one man's freedom to systemic change, Burkina Faso stood at a crossroads, ready to prove that when leadership embraces accountability, a country can transform injustice into opportunity, and that true power belongs to those who dare to correct their mistakes. As the spark of Act 1 turns into a blazing call, Traoré's name echoes from coast to coast. In Los Angeles, college students link arms outside the federal courthouse, chanting, "Burkina Faso rises while America sleeps." In Atlanta, commuters pause under MARTA lights to read a banner declaring, "We remember Sankara, we follow Traoré." From Seattle to Dakar, activists find their rallying cry in his unwavering stance. Online, that rallying cry spread like wildfire. A raw TikTok clip of Traoré's steady voice, "We won't beg for survival, we'll seize our dignity," became the driving beat for protest videos. Activists paired it with images of empty food banks, shuttered schools, and parched water towers. Overnight, hashtags like #SeizeOurDignity and #BuildLicatraire trended in capitals from Washington, D.C. to Lagos. City walls transformed into strategy boards. In Harlem, a giant stencil of Traoré in beret silhouette declared, "The revolution. Where's a beret?" In Oakland, murals urged, "Build like Traoré." In Miami, portraits of his calm defiance loomed over bustling streets. Digital artists layered his image onto scenes of urban struggle, police protests, housing crises, food deserts, turning every wall into a shared blueprint for change. Even formal power centers could no longer look away. In Washington's briefing rooms, analysts flagged Traoré's name as an unlikely yet powerful spark in U.S. civil movements. Lawmakers wrestled with protests against visa bans on African nations, forced to face the irony of punishing countries striving for self-reliance. Suddenly, the president of a landlocked Sahel state became the benchmark for genuine leadership. Behind the headlines, grassroots organizers wove digital tools into their strategy. Flash mobs coordinated via encrypted chat apps, AI-powered mapping, predicted crowd movements and police routes. Village chiefs in Mali and community leaders in Detroit shared live bulletins, turning scattered rallies into a seamless, cross-continental movement. Distance and time zones dissolved under a common mission. Symbolism soon gave way to action plans. Activists drafted blueprints for urban food co-ops on vacant lots, community bike share programs, and rooftop solar cooperatives. Detroit youth swapped lesson plans for workshops titled From Sankara to Traoré, Building Our Future. Brooklyn film festivals retooled lineups to spotlight modern African governance, not just history's tragedies. Debates shifted from slogans to solutions. City councils in Minneapolis and New Orleans cited Burkina Faso's transport co-ops when drafting local transit reforms. New York schools rewrote civics curricula to include Traoré's constitutional changes alongside U.S. history. Protests had evolved into policy laboratories, where the streets guided the halls of power. Innovation hubs sprouted near hydroelectric sites. Over 40 green tech companies, wind turbine designers, battery storage pioneers, off-grid solar specialists, opened regional branches. Collaborative labs buzzed as Burkinabe apprentices paired with German coders and Chinese battery engineers to prototype next-generation energy systems. The region earned a new title, Africa's Silicon Valley of Clean Power. The agricultural landscape transformed overnight. Electric pumps powered by the new grid turned parched fields into year-round farms. Mango orchards yielded double harvests, shipping fresh fruit by refrigerated trucks to Dubai. Rice paddies once fallowed during droughts now thrived, exporting surplus grain to Europe. Families moved from mud huts into brick homes. Children once denied schooling now pursued university degrees. Beyond national borders, the smart grid wove West Africa into a single economic powerhouse. Factories in Accra hummed with continuous output. Agro-processing plants in Bamako shipped goods worldwide. Dakar's fintech startups launched on stable power. Niamey's universities held live virtual lectures over fiber optic lines. A fractured region united under a shared current, proving that reliable electricity is more than infrastructure. It's a catalyst for collective empowerment. As the spark of Act 1 morphs into an explosive call, Traoré's name reverberates across continents and time zones. In Los Angeles, dozens of students lock arms in front of the federal courthouse, their synchronized chant, "Burkina Faso rises while America sleeps," echoing into the pre-dawn hush. In Atlanta, weary commuters stop under the MARTA platform lights to read a massive banner unfurled across the tracks. "We remember Sankara. We follow Traoré." From Seattle's waterfront rallies to Dakar's bustling markets, activists seize his message of defiance as their rallying cry. Online, that cry became a digital wildfire. A no-frills TikTok clip, Traoré, in fatigues, stating calmly, "We won't beg for survival. We'll seize our dignity," served as the pulse for thousands of protest videos. Creatives paired his words with footage of empty food pantries, boarded-up schools, and cracked water towers. Within hours, the hashtags #SeizeOurDignity, #BuildLicatrare, and #NoMoreChains trended from Washington, D.C. to Lagos, turning a West African leader into a global symbol of self-reliance. The streets themselves turned into living strategy boards. In Harlem, a 20-foot stencil of Traoré's beret-clad silhouette dominated a graffiti-covered building, captioned boldly, "The revolution wears a beret." Oakland's murals proclaimed, "Build like Traoré," each brushstroke radiating determination. In Miami's Wynwood Walls district, digital projections of his face flickered over art installations that highlighted police brutality and housing crises. Everywhere, walls bore his image, prescribing blueprints for change rather than mere slogans. Even the corridors of power could not ignore the movement. In encrypted back rooms at the White House, intelligence analysts flagged Traoré's rise as a singular anomaly, an African president igniting unrest in the world's most powerful democracy. Congressional aides wrestled with conflicting briefs as protests against visa bans on African nations intensified, forcing lawmakers to confront the irony of punishing those striving for the very independence their own rhetoric claimed to champion. Suddenly, the leader of a landlocked Sahel nation was the barometer for authentic leadership worldwide. Behind the visceral imagery, grassroots organizers wove sophisticated digital tactics into their playbook. Flash mobs, coordinated via encrypted messaging apps, surged into public plazas. AI-driven mapping tools predicted police movements and optimized protest routes. Community leaders from Bamako to Detroit shared live updates, forging an unstoppable cross-continental network. Where borders once divided, a unified mission now connected. The era of symbolic defiance gave way to concrete action plans. In Detroit, a coalition of youth activists drafted a proposal to transform abandoned lots into urban food co-ops. In Brooklyn, Film festival curators rewrote their lineups to spotlight modern African governance rather than colonial relics. In San Francisco, urban planners sketched out community bike share routes inspired by Burkina Faso's rural transport cooperatives. These were not academic exercises. They were prototypes for a new economy. Municipal debates shifted gears from protest slogans to policy solutions. Minneapolis City Council members cited Burkina Faso's transport co-ops when reimagining local bus systems. In New Orleans, officials redesigned flood response protocols inspired by West African water management innovations. New York schools rewrote their civics curriculum to include Traoré's constitutional reforms alongside American history, ensuring students learned lessons in sovereignty and solidarity. Innovation hubs sprouted like seedlings near the hydroelectric projects. Dam sites. Over 40 green tech companies, wind turbine engineers, battery storage startups, off-grid solar pioneers, opened regional offices. Collaborative labs buzzed as Burkinabe apprentices worked side by side with German software architects and Chinese battery specialists to prototype next-generation grid solutions. When international media dubbed this region Africa's Silicon Valley of clean power, the moniker stuck. The agricultural landscape experienced an unprecedented renaissance. Electric pumps running on stable, renewable energy turned arid fields into fertile farmland. Mango orchards once yielding a single meager season now boasted 2 harvests per year, with refrigerated trucks shipping produce to Dubai's luxury markets. Rice paddies, abandoned during droughts, now hummed with water, supplying surplus grain to European importers. Families emerged from mud huts into brick homes. Children who once studied by kerosene lamp now logged on to online classes from there. Laptops. Beyond Burkina Faso's borders, the smart grid wove a new economic tapestry across West Africa. Textile mills in Accra operated non-stop. Agro-processing plants in Bamako shipped goods globally. Dakar's fintech startups launched services on uninterrupted power. Niamey's universities held virtual symposiums in real time. What once fragmented into isolated crises now moved in concert. Power not as a luxury, but as a shared right, catalyzing innovation and economic integration that in just 8 short years, Traoré's hydroelectric vision, once written off as impossible, had become the blueprint for regional empowerment. Today, the turbines that once tested skeptics' resolve now stand as monuments to collective action, proving that when leadership and people unite around a shared purpose, even the most daunting obstacles yield to the force of self-reliance. Momentum peaked. The movement had transformed from symbolic chants into tangible change. Neighborhood committees in London organized solidarity rallies, while in Tokyo's tech districts, developers began adapting open-source grid software inspired by Burkina Faso's smart network. News anchors in Sydney described the initiative as the most audacious campaign for justice and empowerment in a generation. Back home, ordinary citizens felt the ripple in their daily lives. Small businesses expanded with reliable power, local farms thrived on new irrigation, and community centers hosted bilingual story sessions on Sankara's legacy and Traoré's blueprint. Traoré himself visited a newly built community school in a former blacked-out village, where teachers used interactive solar-powered tablets and students practiced coding on laptops plugged into microgrids. He paused, watching a girl beam as she ran her first line of code in boardrooms and town halls alike. The narrative had shifted. No longer were African nations defined by scarcity or aid. They were leaders remaking systems to serve people, not profits. The global chorus, united by protests, policy pilots, and power lines, had proven a single idea could cascade into a movement. From Ouagadougou to Oakland, the lesson was clear. When citizens and leaders unite around a shared vision and refuse to wait for permission, they can rewrite history. By the time Act 2 drew to a close, the world was left with an indelible fact. This was not a fleeting uprising, but the ignition of a new era. Burkina Faso, once sidelined by geopolitics and prejudice, had become the spark for a continent and a world demanding its own destiny. And the question everyone carried forward was no longer can they do it, but what will we build next?